while Europe burns, the fiddling that's been going on over what to do to tackle the issue, you could say politically. And with us again to talk about it, we want to welcome him back, Eric Brice, who teaches at the University of the French West Indies. He is in Brussels. Philippe Avie, who is the head of economic studies at BNP Paribas Bank, and Tariq Moakil, economist and author of Asset Markets, Portfolio Choice, and Macroeconomic Activity. Welcome back to all three of you. I just want to point out to you what our friend Paul Taylor of the Reuters news agency wrote in his Tuesday column for the International Herald Tribune. He said, to assuage domestic political interest groups, especially in Germany, Europe is fiddling while Athens burns. German, Dutch, Austrian, and Finnish lawmakers, furious at having to bail out peripheral Eurozone countries seen as having lived beyond their means, are demanding that banks and insurers share their burden of any further assistance to Greece. Is there the sense where you are, Eric Brice, that there's been too much talk publicly over what to do here, and that's contributing to the jitters we've seen on world markets over the situation in Europe, that basically the politicians have been a little bit too public in venting their differences?
That's true that when you're dealing with the market, you have to be very cautious about every word you say, because we live in a society where basically the social computing has been granted to financial markets, which try to interpret exactly what you said and translate it into numbers. But at the same time, you can also use it and try to convey strong message, leadership messages, the fact that you won't mess around, that you're going to pull the trigger. What I see here is, in fact, things going back and forth. And it's not only a politician. Maybe a politician, express themselves a bit too much. But at the same time, bankers, they keep silent, and they have a genuine exposure to those countries. And what I'm puzzled with is that, bankers also have their share of guilt into that mess, because at the end of the day, who was supposed to control risk, to manage risk? And we see now banks that are in a situation where somehow they are bigger than ever. They are too big to fail. And there is that uncertainty of whether or not we will have them pay, because I can't see a solution out of restructuring those debt, lengthening the maturity, and obviously those banks are going to have to take their share. So that's this uncertainty bouncing back and forth between politicians and bankers, financial markets, they don't like it at all.
Phoebe Avie, your reaction to that?
A few points. First of all, it was about the conflicting messages from politicians, etc. That's true on a European level, as it has been said. This is very, very bad for financial markets, because people interpret things, and an idea can transform in a decision, and a decision is a kind of self-fulfilling prophecy and goes to something very nasty. It's true also on the domestic side. When you listen in Germany, you have different messages. And the last point I wanted to mention regarding that issue has to do with Italy, because I explained Italy last week to investors in Hong Kong, I said, okay, they have a big debt. Yes, it's the same for the last 10 years. Nothing happened. They have a tiny deficit when compared to the others, because they didn't decide anything during the crisis, so they didn't support the economy. They don't have any bank or real estate kind of bubble. So the thing is quite okay, and they have taken very appropriate decision when reforming their pensions, varying that it means the thing clean for years. So suddenly you have a conflict between, it seems, the Prime Minister and the Ministry of Finance path. Rates goes up tremendously. So it's a very good example about what not to do. The second aspect of thing when it comes to the involvement of private sector, as they say, one is to be two things. One is the public opinion. We talked about the Finns, etc. It's very difficult to have an opinion getting in favor of Europe when you spent 10 years bashing Brussels. Oh, this thing is wrong. Oh, that's because of Brussels.
But Eric Briest making the point that we realized that in 2007 that the banks were 2008 the banks were too big to fail. There was a dip in profits, but if we look at the latest numbers for the profits of the banks, they're in the billions of euros.
The banks are not are supposed not to finance the economy. Now we finance the economy, and they are still complaining. So what do they want at the end of the day? No, what I want to stress very rapidly is something else. When it comes to banks, you take the German banks, for example, they have a lot of debt of the periphery. So if they are impacted, especially the so-called public banks, that are not that private, they will need the help of the government. So it's more complicated than it seems. The French banks proposed a mechanism last week. It makes problem with rating agencies. All that has to be negotiated. There will be the summit next week. We will see. The only thing is, very often you find comparisons with Argentina. It's very different. In the past, you had loans from banks to a country, okay? A few banks, you put them around the table and you open negotiation. Now, what do we have today? We have a market, bonds, insurance companies, pension funds, mutual funds, the guy who sells to you a SICAV denominated in bonds, etc., plus the banks. It's much, much more complicated
it's not
than
just
before.
The banks. But when you read in the press, people saying that the French president, Nicolas Sarkozy, is more interested in protecting the French banks than in stopping Greece from going under, what do you answer?
I mean, we have to keep the euro. That's my answer, if you will, because all that goes together. What is the euro? You raised the question a minute ago. Why the euro? I mean, we set up a common market. We set up a single market with a free movement of capital and services. Free movement of capital. You have free movement of capital. Why not a unique currency? At the end of the day, it would make things easier. When you open the frontiers, you have all this cross-border investment. It's kind of normal. And on top of that, you have rating agencies at the time. You had the market saying Greece is perfect. And please, because of risk, instead of distributing credit, buy government bonds, the regulator. Yeah. So maybe,
Yeah, I fully agree with you. And I think that you mentioned this paper in the International Herald Tribune. There was also I read a very good paper last week in the FT, written by Wolfgang Menschau, and I think the title was "Do Not Blame Moody's." And I think the paper was very good.
Credit rating agency.
Yeah, it's not the fault of Moody's, and I agree with my colleague. It's not the fault of the private banking sector in this crisis. The thing is that, of course, you had this problem of communication. You have this problem of a European government disagreeing with each other, but there is nothing new. Once again, the real problem, as my colleague put it at the beginning, is that we do not have fiscal solidarity. And I would add that this crisis is not the fault of the economists as well, because for many years economists have warned that you cannot have a monetary union without fiscal solidarity. And the thing is that we knew that in the long run it cannot work without fiscal solidarity. And what we see is that now, even in the short run, it cannot work without fiscal solidarity, because the only way to bail out Greece that makes sense at the moment is to make a bond swap, and to swap Greek bonds with European bonds backed by the EFSF. So we need fiscal solidarity now, in the short run.
Again, we're not speaking to economists, we're speaking to a wider public. We can give you an example of what Michael from Brampton, Ontario wrote on the France 24 Debate Facebook page. He says the way to solve Europe's problem right now is eliminate usury, kick out the foreign banks who caused the problem, never accept an IMF loan unless you want to privatize your whole country in some sick Friedmanite tragedy. Then an allusion to a free marketeer, Milton Friedman, and start proper job creation, investment, and public spending. A lot of people talk.
What do you call a foreign bank? What is a foreign bank? It has been said we have a unique currency, which is the euro. It's our currency. What is a foreign bank? HSBC, maybe it's English. No, it has both purchased CCF.
Now,
So what does that mean? It's a foreign bank. I mean, you have one of the big catastrophes very close to us, which is in England, Northern Rock. It was a national bank in a country. It was not a foreign bank, so you see.
But when you mention the IMF, it's quite because I'm very curious at the moment to see if this kind of structural adjustment program that were imposed, for instance, to emerging countries or to African countries in the 80s, can be imposed to a democracy like Greece. Will a democracy accept a structural adjustment program?
Eric Brice, your thoughts on this?
Right. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
There's one thing that puzzles me that is not mentioned. You said President Sarkozy decided that we prefer Greece to go down rather than banks.
No, I didn't say that. I said that some people.
Just what I wanted to emphasize is the fact that there is this or this. Now, why would banks be affected if they were correctly capitalized? Because the problem we're seeing now, if you look at Basel III and the more stringent capital requirements that those guys have to comply with, guess what they did over the past few months? Lobby like hell to make sure that they won't have to post as much equity, meaning strong equity, hard equity, as the regulators want. You have beautiful writing by Anat Admati at the Stanford Business School debunking the fact that bankers are saying that if you have them holding more equity, their business will be more costly to run and they would lend less to the economy. I think this is crap. Those guys are too thinly capitalized, they are too toxic, and when one thing like the one we're experiencing now happens, those guys are so toxic that they become contagious, and you add this to the political problem and we end up in a mess. So for once we should ask also and take the opportunity, do we have banks that are robust enough, capitalized properly, and the answer is a resounding no.
Philippe Darvisonnet?
Well, I don't. I'm not supposed to speak about that, of course, because I am an economist, as you know. But I know a few banks. I mean, suppose there was some kind of.
They're supposed to have more
haircut.
capital on the books than they did when this crisis began. That's what Basel III is about. And
Yes, maybe you have a few. We'll have a stress test this evening, I guess. It was supposed to be published. I haven't seen them. But I guess you have banks that are better capitalized than others. That's all I can say. And the problem is with this thing, the problem is if you ask to the banks for some contribution, which might make sense, why wouldn't you ask to other creditors? Because if one kind of creditor helps, it also helps the other creditors, suppose they do nothing. So there is a game problem. Which is an aspect, but the other aspect is, of course, contagion. We have seen it. It's not a risk of contagion. Contagion is sort of there. Now, we've seen it with Italy last week, and with the spreads. And, it can be like this. So it has to be contained.
We need global solutions. And I just want to, before we go, point out what something Financial Times columnist Martin Wolfe wrote this Wednesday, comparing the woes befalling this side of the Atlantic to those that are happening in the U.S. In an article in which he blasts U.S. Republicans for their inflexibility on the question of the debt. He writes, Europe is trapped in its own utopian project, the single currency, just as members of the Tea Party hate paying taxes for those they deem unworthy, so too do solvent Europeans hate transfers to those they deem irresponsible. Before we go, Tariq Moakil, we talk about in the first part here about a wake-up call. Has there been a wake-up call? Are people going to feel more European at the end of all this?
More European, maybe in the past. I deeply believe that the Eurozone is feasible and could could be efficient, and it could be sustainable in the long run. But we need fiscal solidarity. So if we are Europeans, if we believe in Europe, if we believe in the Eurozone, we need to do the fiscal solidarity and now, and to start to implement it now with a bond swapping Greek bonds with Euro bonds. And I think it will work in the long run. So
Eric Brice, quick prediction. What's going to happen in Brussels next week?
Anything can happen. You know, I'm an economist and I hate making predictions. You never know. By the way, you don't know which situation those guys going to be in when they're going to have to decide and go on. What I'd like to emphasize, yes, we need fiscal solidarity. But if you translate this into proper words for the European politicians, it means that you have to reconsider what you call sovereignty. What does it mean? Okay, do you still want to exercise your power, your sovereignty, and at the same time have fiscal solidarity? No, it's an oxymoron. So fiscal solidarity has a lot of implication, and if those guys want to send a strong signal to the market, this is the time to do it. No time to speculate, to weigh the pros and cons. This is the right time. It can be remembered in history as the time when Europe was truly Europe and was no longer young Europe, but mature Europe. And this is the right time to do it. Forget about technicalities, forget about financial engineering, forget about all this. This has to be a genuine political signal that things are going to be handled properly. And at that cost, because this is indeed a cost, then markets will start believing, then rating agencies will start believing. But this is what it takes. And right now, as you said, looking at the discussion, I fear that we won't find that consensus.
We won't find that consensus. Just a yes, no, because we're out of time. Will Europe raise its game next week?
I hope so. I hope so. I mean, you need, as he said, you need a more transfer of sovereignty.
And that's a huge political.
It's needed.
It's a huge political decision to make. Philippe Avie, I want to thank you. I want to thank Tariq Mouakil, and I want to thank Eric Brice for joining us from Brussels, and thank you for being with us for the France 24 debate. We're going to stay on message. Marcus Carlson will have the latest on how Europe's markets have reacted to the latest news concerning the contagion of the debt crisis, and also the remarks of Ben Bernanke before Congress this Wednesday. Stay with us. This is France 24.